Good afternoon. My name is Samer Atal. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Economics. I'm very delighted to welcome you on this very special event hosted by the School of Business of the American University in Cairo. We're celebrating the first anniversary of one of our flagship product, Business Forward. Thank you all for coming for today. Today's topic is obviously of very timely and very important to all of us, and we have a very distinguished list of speakers who would come talk to us about the real DNA of the Egyptian economy. I'll be today's moderator. Without further ado, the first speaker of today is Dean Sharif Kamel. He's the Dean of the School of Business, so I'll give the floor to him. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. As Samer made a brief introduction, we're very happy to celebrate the first anniversary of Business Forward. Let me just go back in time and explain to you the reason why we did Business Forward and the origins of Business Forward. So back in 2010, we wanted to have a platform where the community would have access to an independent, free, timely, informative platform that shares thoughts, ideas, perspectives on the economy, business, industry in Egypt. So one thing led to another until we published what we called at the time ABR. ABR stood for AUC Business Review. The themes of the school and the pillars were leadership, innovation, responsible business, and entrepreneurship. So we started publishing the journal, ABR, a couple of times a year for 6 issues, from 2013 until 2016. It was very well received, and I want to seize the opportunity and thank one of our own, Mustafa Sarhank, who was the chairman of the International Business Association Group, who used to publish and support the journal. But then, as you all know, one thing leads to another, and the world of social media, digital, and so on really is taking the lead. So we decided to change the model. And hence came the Business Forward notion. And I want to here again seize the opportunity and thank the founding editor, Amira Ahmed, she's here today, of Business Forward, because I think the outreach of Business Forward reflects exactly where the business school wanted to go. I also want to seize the opportunity to thank the inaugural editing board of Business Forward, Naveen Al-Tahri, Dalia Wahbat, Tariq Tawfiq, Ayman Ismail, Ali Bassuni, and Kevin O'Connell. As you can see, it's a mix between academia and business and industry. It's a mix also of different experiences and backgrounds. So Business Forward was launched in November 2017 as a knowledge portal. For those of you familiar, not just in the world of academia, but also across different sectors, the notion of knowledge portals are becoming extremely useful. A, it builds a community around it. B, it gives access to data. And C, it gives you an overlook on certain subjects that are covered. As I said, informative, upbeat, current, and most importantly, independent. So I'm extremely happy that throughout, it's exactly 1 year since we started, Business Forward has provided through its team pragmatic, timely, forward-looking perspective on different aspects. So far, we've had interviews and coverage of a multiplicity of sectors, including but not limited to real estate, tourism, the food industry, the financial sector, and the banking sector, the stock market, education, and retailing, to mention a few. A long lineup of interviews took place throughout last year, and we look forward to expand while cautiously covering the issues that are important to business and industry. And that is the most important element in our business model. It's something that people would have access to. It's something that people, obviously for free, it's something that people would find it useful and use it, most importantly. So 1 year, according to my colleagues, the numbers we've reached is so far 5,000 plus subscribers. Initially, as you can expect, the coverage was received by 100% subscribers from Egypt, but that was not the intention. The intention is not to speak to each other. The intention is to showcase what the opportunities that we have to the outside world. So throughout last year, we went from 100% local to 77% local and 23% international, which I think is key. I look forward next year, we even multiply that. The more we talk to the outside world, the more we create opportunities for our economy, and the more we can reflect the real facts of what we can do and the opportunities that we can have. Twice a month, it's accessible, but obviously you can access it through the website, and I'm sure you'll find outside more information and details about about Business Forward. Before I finish, definitely, as so many people who I want to thank, as I said, the founding editor, Amir Ahmad. I also want to thank the senior editor today of Business Forward, Gihad Hussein and Toa Azzedine, one of our team members. But also the rest of the team at the school, and also our supporters across the industry and business. This platform, I think, can go all the way. We're still scratching the surface, by the way. But I think we have a very solid base, and the credibility of Business Forward, like probably anything in the world of information and media these days, and there's so many of those, is actually the credibility of the information and how it's reliable, how the resources come through, and how it is used by the industry. So, as I said, we're still scratching the surface, but I think we have a very solid model to build on. And thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Dean Kamel. We have a very long list of speakers for today, so I strongly encourage you to look and consult the list of speakers as we move ahead. Our first speaker in today's event is Mr. Hatem Al-Azzawi. He's the Managing Director of PICO Modern Agriculture. He's also the Deputy Chairman of the Agricultural Committee at the American Chamber of Commerce. He's a graduate from UC Davis with a bachelor's degree and MBA with honors from University of Chicago. Please, sir. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of my talk today is how Egyptian family businesses can play a greater role in advancing and how Egyptian family businesses can play a greater role in advancing and growing Egypt's economy. All right, we're ready? But before I do, it's important to note the following key figures that have been shared with a group of distinguished family business leaders during the Family Business Consortium established and led by the AUC. The figures are eye-opening, and we can start by saying that family businesses in the Arab region contribute 60% of GDP and employ over 80% of the workforce, according to the latest PwC Family Business Report. And the major challenge facing family businesses today is that 70% of them disappear and perish with the passing of the owner. This statement says something louder than the numbers. And to me, it says it is business. Name it family, name it whatever you want to name it, it is business. It fails and succeeds for the fundamental reasons that govern a business through its journey. Now, while there might be many theories and handbooks on how to transition family-run businesses to becoming institutions that drive growth sustainably, the practice itself is far more than challenging. Today, most Egyptian family businesses, with the exception of a few, of course, are classified in US dollar revenue terms as small and medium enterprises. And the key question is, how do we change this? How do we become institutions that are regionally and globally recognized, thus contributing far greater value to Egypt's GDP and tax revenues while generating new jobs to employ our youth, our real capital? Basically, the main focus today should be, or one of the main focuses should be, how can Egyptian industries create platforms that enable foreign direct investment to start pouring into our economy? If we look at the latest figures of Egyptian FDI for the first 9 months of 2017 and 2018, we will note the following. 66% has gone into petroleum, 10% has gone into manufacturing, 0% in agriculture, 4% in construction, 12% in services, including real estate and financial services. Needless to say that the absolute figure itself is humble, to say the least. So there is great room, there is potential here. I can comment on the agricultural export space myself, as I do find it very disappointing that I do represent the agriculture export space, and it's very difficult to comprehend the fact that we were unable to close any significant transactions, seeing the fundamentals on the ground, seeing the extensive distribution network that some of the traders have, moving product from the south of Egypt all the way to the governments and across liquid businesses, yet still none of them were able to close a transaction or even qualify for a due diligence. And why? Simply because the platform doesn't exist. The platform that will cater to the foreign investor doesn't exist. Now, so the point of the discussion here is how we can generate platforms, how we can build platforms to attract foreign direct investment into our small and medium enterprise space. Now, although emerging markets have seen a setback lately, growth capital is still actively seeking out investments in emerging markets. While the process is far more competitive today than it was, Egypt industries have the fundamentals that drive investors' appetites still. We have the power, and we always say it, the power of the 104 million, and we can write stories about that. Everything from consumption to human capital to labor to skilled labor, it's all there. The platform, however, is still not up to that standard. So, having said this, having the right business model and solid fundamentals is not the only prerequisite to actually locking in or closing a transaction and attracting growth capital. The business needs to endure an investor's due diligence and stress test. It's simple. I can remember many cases, without mentioning names of course, of investors walking away from great potentials simply because the platform was shaky, to say the least. The financial disciplines were loose, and the way the business was run made it an unviable concern, although they have a very good business model and good potential. So in order to attract that growth capital, which by the way should not only bring with it financial support, it should also bring strategic support that could accelerate growth and generate greater value, the following needs to be considered. There is the role of the family, the business owner, call it what you want. And obviously, we can start by saying the obvious, corporate governance. This is the obvious. A lot of families in Egypt, a lot of business owners in Egypt have engaged and have hired consultants to talk about corporate governance and how it's implemented. But the focus from what we've seen, and this is practice, there's no data behind this, was always on how the family deals with each other and how the cousins talk to each other, which is quite frankly an unconcern at this point in time. The concern and the focus should be slightly changed. And while corporate governance is comprehensive, the focus should be on institutionalizing the business rather than the family and how cousins deal with each other. Focus on sustainable growth. Implement risk management measures that make your business resilient. Succession planning needs to start bottom up, not top down. Many people address succession planning by looking at the senior management and how and who's going to be the next MD, who's going to be the next chairman, but nobody considered the makers, the shakers and makers of the operation. The bottom, some of them, a lot of them are over a certain age bracket without mentioning any numbers, and there are no successors. And when they fail, the operation fails from the bottom, from the core. So succession planning needs to start bottom up rather than top down. Understand your rigid core. Whenever you are a business that is run as a family or an SME, you have a core that has led you to that point at this point in time. Having younger members of the business come in and try to change that core or muscle that core is not going to work. Understand your rigid core in terms of human capital. Understand how you can respect that rigid core and how they can be part of the journey, of the transitional journey. Keep that due diligence checklist in front of you at all times. Manage your financial disciplines. These are just some pieces of advice that investors have come in. They've looked at businesses and they've walked away. They've walked away again from sound models, from sound economic models, simply because they see financial disciplines that are so loose across the business and they simply become uninterested or actually shy away from the investment itself. So manage your financial disciplines and embrace the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy needs to be efficient, but also needs to be embraced. It's not something to be taken lightly. Delegate, of course. As business owners, it is always very difficult to let go of that authority, to let go of that power. So long as you're holding it there, you're going to stay there, you're going to be an SME. Your only way to move forward is to attract external, annoying board members to your team, have them come in, scrutinize you, tell you what you're doing wrong, and be okay with it, and delegate authority on that front. Once that platform is stable, you will get your fair valuation. FDI will flow as growth capital at a much faster pace, thus benefiting Egypt and growing your business beyond your own means financially and strategically. Secondly, second to the role of the business owners is the government role. Over the past 2 years, Egypt has lived through the most courageous economic reform program. The initiatives were very much needed, be it the devaluation, the lifting of subsidies forcing rationalization, and many others. It is fair to say that the government had the courage to take on historic issues and thus setting a direction for Egypt's economy that we all endorse and appreciate. Having said this, it's time for another round of courage. Another round of courage is absolutely needed now. Firstly, I would start by talking about tax reform. It's an issue of critical importance. I'm not talking about the rate, I'm talking about the mechanics. Allow us to focus on our core business. Our core business is not to hire tax accountants. Our core business is not to spend a third of our time dealing with tax authorities and talking about why COGS should be considered or otherwise. I'm not going to go into details. But our core business, in our case, is agriculture. We should be focused on agriculture. We should be hiring in agriculture, not spending a third of our time dealing with the tax authority and wasting time over issues that, quite frankly, should be done and dusted before we even start. Tax reform is an issue of critical importance today, and I cannot emphasize this further. In addition, allow us to allocate our capital towards our core business. It's not when we go today and overpay on an estimate that's been done with the promise that if we get a verdict in our favor, it will be transferred to credit. Yes, this credit could have gone into buying a line, hiring people, and actually investing in the core business. This all emphasizes the issue and the very urgent need of tax reform. Increase the flow of companies secondly, after tax reform, the attempt to increase the flow of companies from formal to informal economies. Yes, this is something that's been said over and over again. How do we invite the informal sector to the formal sector? As we do understand that it's quite substantial today, it's not just the incentives. The incentives are maybe the third or fourth priority, but there's an issue of trust. There's an issue of credibility that has to be established first. Create a non-threatening environment. I'm talking about the government role here. Create a non-threatening environment internally. Show goodwill towards the incumbents because those on the sidelines are watching what's happening inside the ring. So show goodwill towards the incumbents, be consistent about it, and then offer the incentives. We will see a greater flow of informal into formal economies. Finally, it is now time for sector-specific legislation. The economic reform initiatives have set the direction and the path. However, we do need sector-specific legislation to see that journey through. By sector-specific legislation, examples from our own agri-export space include land ownership legislation, been talking about it too long, IPR laws, food safety laws, and total subsidy reform. The subsidies today are directed towards companies, and in my most humble opinion, they should be directed towards the industry. They should be directed towards making the industry more competitive rather than trying to deal with individual companies. So basically, on the government role, we need to see another round of courage to set forward further initiatives that address industries rather than companies, making Egypt more competitive. So with this, I will end here. And if you have any questions or anything, I can entertain them. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you for a very, very comprehensive, I would say very comprehensive plan for the economy. Includes a lot of ingredients. I took a lot of notes. I'll probably use them myself. So talking about the platform for FDI, talking about reform, the role of government, the role of businesses, corporate governance, the family business, very, very comprehensive. Thank you so much. So moving from family business to the sharing economy, which is, again, a very important element of the real economy of Egypt. I'm very happy to introduce one of our own, Dr. Nagla Riz. She's the founding director of Access to Knowledge for Development. She's a professor of economics at the Department of Economics, and someone I'm very happy to call a friend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. I should also add that I'm the reason we have a stool here, a platform, so you can see me. So you'll find everybody looking taller, perhaps, than what they really are. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Dean Kamel, also Dr. Samra Atalla, Business Forward. It's very nice to be among friends. I am asked to talk about the sharing economy. And let me just start by saying, how many of you has used Uber or Careem at least once? Okay, so it is very much part of our reality. And when I talk about the sharing economy in Egypt, I have basically 3 points to make. First, I want to show or explain how the sharing economy actually is a newcomer to a classic tension in the digital economy. I teach a course called the Digital Economy and another course on copyright. And basically, the idea here is when, with the internet, digital technologies, mobile telephony, etc., there is a classic tension. On the one hand, people will talk about the sharing economy as a platform. They talk about the internet and digital technologies as a platform for empowerment, and how the internet and others have perhaps moved the economy a step closer to perfect competition, which we teach in our introductory courses, many buyers, many sellers, perfect flow of information, etc., etc. Now, on the one hand, you can look around us and see that people are finding new business opportunities in working using digital technologies. Yet, on the other hand, and at the same time, you will find that the digital technologies, because of the nature, because of the intellectual component, and partly because of intellectual property, they may end up actually perpetuating hierarchies that have existed all along. So you have the large companies, the hierarchies, the top-down becoming bigger. Look at the top, companies on the Forbes or otherwise. It's always the Googles and the Intels and the Apples and the Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. So these two trends are happening at the same time. And what we, in the course, we usually talk of centrifugal forces moving away from the center and centripetal forces moving towards the center, and both happening at the same time. The reason I give this as an introduction is that if we have this discussion about the sharing economy, about the ride sharing in particular, in the global north, perhaps in the US or Western Europe or in Canada, you will always find a tone that looks at these companies and these business models as hierarchical as ever. They're becoming stronger. This is, outright capitalism as we know it. On the other hand, you come to the context here in Egypt and other places of the global south, and things may be a little different. And this is my second point, that context matters. If I look at Uber and Careem and other forms of sharing economy services, the reality is they are offering opportunities for work, not employment, opportunities for work, and helping, as we say in Arabic, بيفتحوا بيوت. So in that sense, I think the lesson here is that one needs to take a nuanced approach to studying these issues and not just adopt a classical argument that says, you know, these companies are as good old capitalists as they come. Well, sure, they have, you know, elements of becoming more hierarchical and getting larger. Yet, if you look, especially in the global south, you'll find a different scenario. At the center, the Access to Knowledge for Development Center, we have been researching specifically, actually, the ride-sharing Uber and Careem drivers and the women drivers. So we have a study on, I did last year, I did a fireside chat here with a representative from Uber's board, but also I published a paper on the Uber driver partners in Egypt based on a fieldwork and survey with questions looking at their livelihood. And also we worked on a study on the women, the gendered perspective, the gendered approach to women drivers, to the ride sharing, which I will talk about in a minute. So let's look at our context in Egypt. I don't need to preach, you know, the state of the economy of Egypt. I mean, there is a high element of unemployment. There is unemployment of the youth, of the educated, and of women. And we are in a situation where statistics on income distribution would not make us very happy. And the reality is, especially after the devaluation, that life has become tough for many. This is the reality. And it is a situation where you have, as I said, the educated, the youth, etc. We do have a youth bulge, more than 60% of the population under 30 years of age, and this is CAPMAS statistics. Unemployment of the educated, for those who held a university degree or higher, more than 25%. Youth unemployment, 25% for men and 47% for women. And we do have a gendered unemployment. We do have higher rates of unemployment for women. Additionally, we have the informal economy with all its rigor and its vitality and its shielding, perhaps Egypt from external shocks. Yet at the same time, it is worth you know, looking deeper into what's happening with the informal sector, as my previous speaker has spoken about. And we do have a situation where obviously Cairo is a mega city. You just have to commute to or from New Cairo, you know, which we all do, to realize and understand and remember how congested and you know, polluted Cairo is. So the reality, I mean, some figures, in 2016, UN ranked Greater Cairo metropolitan area as the 9th largest global megacity. Egypt ranks 131 out of 191 countries with 45 motor vehicles per 1,000. In 2014, the World Bank study found that private cars dominate the transportation context, constituting 55% of vehicles in Cairo, with a 7.8% increase in car licensing. Only 10% of Egyptians have access to private cars. And the same study calculated a deduction of 3.6% of Egypt's GMP due to wasted fuel and cleaning up minor traffic accidents. So, et cetera, et cetera. I think I don't need to convince you that Cairo is a big city and that public transportation is an issue, especially for women. So at the end of the day, really, this is the reality. We have a scenario where there are challenges in the economy. People are finding it difficult to find work, and I use the word work. You know, there is an issue of employment, but also work with the new opportunities can take place. And you also have a positive reality where people are being more connected, more than 100% mobile phone penetration. Excuse me. And Egypt is set to have 28 million smartphone users by 2019, according to Statistica, and an internet penetration of 44%. So you put all of this together, you know, challenges, economic challenges, you know, challenges finding work, congested city, and technology. And, you know, against all of this, you do have a reality. You do have the ride-sharing, you know, services, Uber, Careem, and others. In fact, there's also Swivel, the bus service, and Uber is launching, I'm not, you know, advertising for them, but they're launching a bus service actually tomorrow as well. So this is the reality. You have a number of drivers for Careem. We do not have a disclosed figure for the number of Careem drivers, but Uber, they have 150,000 drivers and around 100 women. They both launched in 2014, expanding to major cities outside Cairo over the last 3 years. Also, women drivers represent a small percentage, obviously, from the total group. So, you know, this is this is our context, and this is the reality that these two, you know, players are there and others. So what did we find in our studies? First of all, when we surveyed 810 Uber driver partners in Cairo, the typical Uber driver is a male, young, 70% were between the ages of 18 and 35, educated, married, and supporting 3+ people. This is a typical Uber driver that we surveyed. 96% of the drivers had a high school diploma or above. 51% had a college degree. More than 50% of the drivers randomly selected had a university degree or higher. Okay, so 19% of the sample were previously employed in the informal sector, and 22% came immediately from tourism and transport at a time where, since 2011, there have been challenges to these sectors in particular. So this is the reality. So when I sit in a global meeting and I see what I see, for better or for worse, opportunities, yes, they need to be regulated. I mean, I take all of this. But when I see these initiatives demonized, I think twice. Because in our part of the world, and not just in Egypt, in India and in Latin America and others, for better or for worse, they are providing means of livelihood. And that's the important thing. The question is, how can we regulate, yes, and how can we look at ways to encourage that in a way that does not challenge or threaten other sectors in the economy. I have several statistics that I will not go through here in particular, but let me tell you just a couple more, just a couple. Almost 70% of the drivers said that joining Uber did increase their overall income. Half of the sample considered Uber as their only or biggest part of income, okay? And then quite often what you would get as responses in both studies, the survey of drivers and the focus groups with women, we did with women and Careem drivers, you listen to the women's stories and each one is just incredible in and of on its own. You listen to how when the women have this opportunity, they are able to provide livelihood for themselves, they are able to incredibly and organically organize their own safety amongst themselves, not only with the company, but the initiatives, the organic initiatives that come between the women themselves and the men, actually, the group of drivers, the groups that they do on WhatsApp and help each other circumvent any safety threats is really quite remarkable. And quite often what they say is they are interested, they are happy to work with, quoting, a respectable company. So I'm not advocating. All I'm saying is that this is what we see on the ground. And it is important to look at what's happening on the ground on our part of the world and see how we make the best of it in a way that benefits everyone. So in all of this, I think we have, the work is published online. We also, I have a chapter coming up on the regulation, around that and the recent law that was issued. But I want to just end by saying that it is very important that the voice of this part of the world, the story of this part of the world is presented to complete the picture. So when we study the sharing economy in different parts of the world, you will get a different story depending on where you're looking at. And it's important to understand and see how we can improve. I'm very proud that the study of the Uber drivers was actually mentioned in El Garida Rasmiya, when there was a debate over حماية المنافسة, جهاز حماية المنافسة. And what happened is that in the Garida Rasmiya, in the official Gazette of Egypt, the 23rd of October 2018, there was talk about one of the company buying the other. And the جهاز حماية المنافسة, the competition authority, was not for this, was against this. And we're making a statement saying that this is against competition. Remember my earlier point about conglomerates getting bigger, and this is a very good step in saying that this actually affects competition in the market. You cannot have two large companies, one of them buying the other, and you end up having a practical monopoly. And they quoted our study. So this is something very nice, because as researchers, there's nothing more that we want than impact on policy, impact on research, impact on businesses. So from that, I want to also thank Business Forward, because they interviewed me and they wrote about our research. The team is here, and this is all a team effort at the Access to Knowledge for Development. But this goes back to what Dean Kamel said earlier about dissemination. Disseminating our research, taking it to wider platforms, to readers, not just in academic publications, but also in very serious and rigorous platforms that share and provide our our studies to different audiences, and this is very much needed. So this is really, what I wanted to say. So my 3 points were, just to recap, is first that the digital economy offers opportunities to the large player and the small player, and it is up to us which trend we want to encourage. This is very important, and how to encourage it. If the objective, and I hope it is, of policy making is empowering the small player, then how can we actually take steps to strengthen and promote that, centrifugal force rather than centripetal perpetuating existing hierarchies. My second point is that context matters. When we come and study the sharing economy, types of ride sharing or whatnot, we need to look at the context, to look at what else is there and how can we best utilize the opportunities that are offered. And then my third point is actually the importance of dissemination and trying to reach many audiences, for which I thank Business Forward. And I thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Nagla. This is very, very interesting. The work you've done and really gives us a very large perspective on the role of sharing economy in employment and growth. And I was really, really fascinated by the numbers you gave, and the fact that 50% or more of the male drivers have a university degree really touches on a lot of the structural problem of our employment in Egypt. So moving from shared economy, we move to startups, the new buzzword that is very important to our economy. So I would like to invite the next speaker, Ms. Zeina Mandour. She's the general manager of Cairo Angels. She's previously handling the Mint Incubator program. So she will tell us more about the startups. Okay, welcome. Thank you. You can step on the thing.
Okay. So it's interesting topics. We're starting from family business into sharing economy and all of this. Now come to a different word, which is startups. I can start with the definition of startups. There's people define it through number of employees. People define it from total revenues they have made, when they actually founded, maybe the number of rounds they have raised as an investment. But it's more beyond that. For me, when I define a startup, it's all about rapid growth. So they're growing really fast in a specific term of time because people expecting an investment, when they invest in a startup, they're expecting a specific return. And this return in a span of time, it has to be very aggressive because, again, I'm risking in a startup that a couple of people with a nice idea, they come to me with a passion and saying, I have this idea and I want you to invest in me. So this is, for me, is the definition of a startup. And this is how it differentiated from being small or medium or a family business, because I'm not expecting growth of 20% on a yearly basis. I'm expecting actually 200 and 300 on a monthly basis. So people come to me, just been in the market for 3 months or more, saying that I'm growing. So definition for me growing, that you have one customer, I'm expecting you to at least be 200, 300% growth on a monthly basis to be able to tackle this market. So this is how people think about it from our perspective as a startup. Again, the whole thing, or this event is all about how different things contribute to the economy in Egypt. So how startups contributing to this economy? I want to talk about the different stakeholders first. When the whole initiative or the whole idea of bringing startups came from a Silicon Valley in the States, it's a different model. Somehow people start to replicate it, which is not the perfect idea, but we're learning. And we've been, the whole startup scene has not been more than maximum 10 years if you want to count it as actually being active. So it's creating more than just an idea, just an idea of not only a company. There's a lot of things that have been integrated into the market and into the economy with the notion of a startup. So starting with, first of all, people supporting the startup, such as incubators, accelerator, this is the role or the other entity that gives support to startup, to help them how they can go into the market, how they can tackle it to this market. And to be honest, it's more than just, it started as a couple of people in the market. Now we have a lot. And it was not enough because all of them coming from saying, I will give you sort of consulting, I can put an amount of money. But the startups are dealing with a market, dealing with the government. And now I'm happy to say that in the couple of last years, other players came into the incubation and accelerator model, which is the corporate. Because at the end of the day, startup, they are dealing with the customers and dealing with the potential partners. And if they don't understand the notion of a startup or how to deal with them, they will never be able to collaborate. Because for instance, I'm saying for a bank, I want to do a partnership, and you're telling me I need all of this paperwork, and I need you to be at least to register for 1 year, and here I'm not asking at least for a loan. I'm asking that I want to offer a product to you as a bank, but the bank cannot accept them because they are less than a year in the market, and they need to validate the product. However, now banks actually entering this, and they're creating their own incubator and creating their own products to support this, even the investment banks doing that. On the other side, okay, the government, how I'm going to deal with such a thing. The first thing is working again, giving them sort of incubators, launching new sort of laws and regulations that happening to endorse such a thing and initiative. Starting from giving them sort of loans that accommodate their needs, giving not only the money, I'm giving an access to different tools, to different communities that build together so we can network. Because when you have a product or you have an idea, you need different pillars, which is this is how actually build the ecosystem of startups. You need a pillar or actually to do a partnership. Meet other people you can syndicate together, which is come the event. This is a one pillar, is beyond money. It's not only the entity giving money, but again, believing in that I need to build a network together that helps startups grow. Which is, this is how they contribute to the economy, because I'm not only creating a company now, I'm not only incubators or a sort of accelerator that support the startup. Now I'm building a whole network that come together on a different time of a year. They can meet, which is bringing other people outside of the economy to can see this sort of companies they're growing in the market. At the same time, which was on the benefit of Egypt, we can see the region now, or when it comes to Middle East, not the most stable when it comes to other countries. So people come to Egypt because, again, thanks to what's happening now, they are stable. So I'm integrating, and the ecosystem in Egypt can actually hold more than startups that Egyptians. So we have a lot of people come from Yemen, Iraq, people from Palestine. All of this is a hub now. Cairo, or Egypt, is actually a hub to endure all of this and to support other startups in the economy. So there's plenty of space to startups that can come on board. And now the expanding, which is the role of the incubators and the spaces that hold such entities, they are growing now. So for instance, we're talking about the Greek campus. They have now a headquarters in Cairo, and they're growing in Asyut because we need support in this region, and we know Asyut is, when it comes to the money in Upper Egypt, is actually the capital of it is Asyut. And they're growing even bigger towards Saudi Arabia and other places. So, and all of this came from just an idea of, I want to create my own company. And we're going to talk later why people want to go through this. The last two different stakeholders they included, and they were being born through the startups coming during the investment. So if I'm coming as a startup and I want to invest, and I'm seeking investment, I need to go to other people and I need to convince them, which is the role of angel investors come. What we mean by angel investor, not someone is coming for حب في الله, no, it's coming to, he support the idea. He's angel because he's willing to take the risk, that he's looking for a return, but he's actually diversifying his investment, and he invests in different companies that he knows, as statistically wise, if the founders in age between 20s, the early 30s, statistically, 1 of 10 startups actually will return the investment to me, and then the other 9 will fail. If the founders in their age of mid-30s to 40s, which is actually now the updated statistically globally, I'm talking, the failure rate actually decreased to 40%. So I'm saying 60% is going actually to fail, and the other one going to increase out of the 10 companies. So now there is people coming on board a lot to invest. However, it's not enough, because if you're talking from a ratio, we have a lot of VCs in the market, which is they invest in the companies, in the startup, but in a very late stage when they already have enough traction. And what I mean by traction, they have enough, they validated the product in the market, they have enough customers, they generated revenue, and they sort of break even at this stage. But they are willing to invest a lot, which is X amount of money. However, they don't have enough ideas because we don't have enough angel investors. We don't have enough in Egypt people who are willing to invest in a very early stage company because of the failure rate, which is this is how the other ecosystem trying to support in this. So our problem is not actually in the bigger tickets, the problem is the smaller tickets. When I'm talking about the angel investor invest per startup 100K Egyptian pound, not a lot because he's investing in other startups and there's co-investing. So this is, can you imagine all of amount of money they've been injected in this ecosystem or a couple of startups, because if in each incubator they have at least 2 cycles per year. So each cycle take from 7 to 8 startups. So I'm saying that the main players in the market when it comes to incubators, we have around from 9 to 10 incubators / accelerator depending on the stage. I have around 200 ideas come to the new world that we can tell and test on a yearly basis, that people actually inject money in them because some of the accelerator put money from starting from 250 Egyptian pound K to maximum 2 million Egyptian pounds. This all of month has been injected here in Egypt, and they bring actually investors from other places. From Oman, they actually, lately there's a company called Wadi, they have been mandated to invest in the MENA region, and when it comes to other than their country, and when it comes to being a hub, Egypt is one of the biggest hubs in the startups because it allows a lot of ideas come on board. So how this actually, all of this different stakeholders, how they impacted the economy in other ways. I'm saying only in this year so far, which is the first 3 quarters, based on Magnet, definitely all of you have been giving a lot of statistics, but when it comes to startups, we don't have actually one force to collect all of the information, but Magnet is actually a startup that's working on this. We have been invested in Egypt so far $33 million, only in 2018, and excluding Su and Karim transactions. So there's a lot of money have been injected in this. And the interesting part, they are not only Egyptian investors, there are other people investing. Like 500 Startup is one of the biggest incubators and accelerator based in Jordan, and it's a US-based company. So it's getting more and beyond an angel people or a couple of investors in Egypt. No, it's a source of, if you want to call it FTI or whatever. And now people have been shifting, and we're talking about unemployment rate. Recently, in 2017, the number have been increased like 7.4% of people population, which is we're saying Dawla Shabba, because again, around 60% are in the youth when it comes to age in Egypt, have been working in startups. First of all, definitely because there is not enough opportunity have presented in the market. At the same time, having an idea and been a lot of encouraging in the market to support startups and to create your own product, because when you create one startup, definitely you create, on average, I'm saying from 4 to 5 positions on a yearly basis if they're growing on a steady place. So if I'm saying that 200 startups, they're being graduated from incubators, and the failure rate is around 90%, so I'm saying at least 20 startups going to work. I'm saying that it's the worst case scenario. So they're definitely creating, on average, 80 jobs per year, which is, this is maybe it's a very small number, but as this sort of market, definitely is bigger, it's growing, and I'm talking about worst case scenario, which actually the numbers are higher than this, when it can contribute 7.5% on last year, definitely is growing. And now what I'm talking is people going to risk. It's not an easy appetite in Egypt. We're very, as a culture, we're very conservative to convince someone, especially I'm talking about angel investor, to deploy money in a startup. It's not easy. However, the number have been increased at least 50% as per the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, which is actually part of initiatives here in AUC. They support this part, that people are willing to take risk, and the number increased by 50%. Whether the number is low or high, yet it's increasing, and this is what people looking for in startups. So why I'm talking about all of this, I'm talking here we talk about family business, talking about big companies, but all of this, they need to help and support startups because they are now, they contributed to the market, especially if you're talking about trend all over the world. It's an easygoing company because they need to be agile. They need a small amount compared to the bigger companies. Maybe the ticket size, I'm talking 1 million to a big company, it will not change your life. However, it's a milestone that will actually endure and support the company for 18 months. This is the average ticket size. So all of these small pillars, they start to contribute in the market and they start to generate things. And we have actually a strong landmark toward the MENA region as a hub for startups. Whoever wants to start a business, they come to Egypt, first of all, because it's cheaper. Definitely labor in Egypt is cheaper compared to Dubai. The rent. So now what's happening or changing towards this, because we've been ready to and have a good platform for startups. A lot of startups, they are based in Dubai, they're moving their operations here, however, they serve customers in Dubai. Because it makes more sense. I have now a proper infrastructure, not ready yet, because of the other things I'm going to talk about, which is government. They're doing actually initiative to support startups, but not enough. First of all, we know most of the startups, at least I'm talking about from 80 to 90%, are tech-based. What I'm saying tech-based, they have a tech component. Some of them, which is around from the 90%, I'm talking about 5%, they actually manufacture hardware. To import hardware is very hard in Egypt because for a lot of security reasons, for instance, if you have even a Wi-Fi module, which is like the router, you cannot import it unless you have تصريح أمني or security permission from the government, and you need to say why. And if it's in a big amount, you cannot, this sort of support that the government gives, because it's now creating an industrial hub to create a product in Egypt, and you actually can export it. It's a room that, because I've been working with 3 startups working on this, creating small devices related to Internet of Things, which is, I can use it in home automation, I can use it in sort of automating information in labor-intense industry like garment or like the furniture, which is already here. It's contribute a lot of in the GDP of Egypt. This sort of things, it is the government need to support, not doing taxes. All of things have been actually part of changing, but when giving a space to import and export products related to startups, this is the main thing that the government needs to work on. On the other things, which is related to small and medium enterprises, it's about the founders of this sort of companies. They need to take a step. They've been in these shoes. They need to do more of mentorship to startups through different platforms. There's a lot of platforms. If a family business founder or a chairman of a company has a room to give, he needs to invest more in the people. It's the first thing. The second thing is actually investing, because without this layer of angel investment, startups will never see the light. Because I'm saying it's a small amount, and the same, they need a boost to be able to reach the VC level, like Algebra Ventures and Sawari Ventures. Without angel investment, this part will never work. The last pillar that I will going to finish my talk with it is the corporate, that they need to be more lenient. And for instance, there's a lot of initiatives have been going through introducing product related to FinTech, which is a product that startup working in a solution that help finance, whether related to banks or whether consumer finance. They say that we want that, but they are not ready. A lot of startups, they actually do a sort of product and they go to the bank, I need your e-wallet or I need any sort of support so you can integrate this product with your bank. Banks are not ready because central bank doesn't give them actually the permission to do sort of things. However, lately there been a committee in the parliament that actually initiating a new law related to FinTech that will help and be more lenient when it comes to producing their product. So this is mainly what I wanted to talk about from the 3 pillars. I hope it was useful. Thanks a lot for listening, and thanks a lot for listening.
Yet another very comprehensive presentation about a very important element of our economy, the startups. Thank you, Zaina, for such a comprehensive presentation of the ecosystem of startups. I'm very delighted to present our next speaker, Dr. Abla Latif. She's the director of the Center of Economic Studies. She's the chairwoman of the Presidential Committee on Economic Development. So without further ado, Dr. Abla, do I give you a minute to take your breath? So Dr. Abla will be telling us, we've heard a lot of recommendations to the government. She's going to tell us about the role of state-owned enterprise in the economic development.
I'm very glad to be here. AUC for me is a home. I was a student here. I taught here for many years. I have lots of colleagues and lots of smiling faces, so this is how I take my breath back. Okay, I'm not that. All right. I'll be talking about the public sector. In Egypt, the challenges and the opportunities, this is the title. Very briefly, I want to start by making 3 key comments or 3 key observations before I start. The first one is that it's acknowledged by everybody from the presidential office or department down, all the way down, that the private sector is the one that is leading the economic development of the country. No question about it. Let's be very clear and very blunt about that. That's the first thing. The second thing, when we talk about challenges and opportunities, and this is really the title with the public sector for this session, challenges translate into opportunities right away. So a challenge is an opportunity for somebody to do something to fix it. Okay? That's the second observation. The third observation is that when we talk about the public sector, okay, we really have to differentiate between a bunch of things. We cannot take it as a bulk. Public sector is a very big, broad title. One of them is, of course, the legacy of the public sector as you have in mind, the public sector companies, particularly in manufacturing that we have around. That's one group. But you also have a legacy of a bunch of public institutions that are in charge and that guide or affect the performance of the private sector in the different parts of the economy. This is part of the public sector, the public institutions. Then you have the third part being the public sector in services as a third legacy, okay? Like in transportation and so on. Okay? So these are 3 different parts. And they're all on the legacy side because they are inherited from a long time ago. Then you have what I do not want to call the new public sector, but let's call it the new role of the public sector, which is actually seen in new involvement of the government in activities, in productive activities, new role by the army that everybody is also observing. These are all the different components of the formula. So when we talk about the public sector, we have to talk about all of these, okay? And as I talk about each one of them very briefly within the allocated time, which Gihad gave me as 12 minutes, or 13 minutes, and 15 seconds, something that specific, okay? Let me start by from the easier to the tougher, okay? Let me start by what I call the new role of the public sector, okay? We are observing a lot of activities by the government, okay? Lots of investment by the government in a broad sense, army included, in certain productive sectors, okay? This was done because we started an economic reform program, and along with this reform program, we were pushing on the development side, okay, with big projects. And it's very tough to do these 2 together, to reform the economy and at the same time try to push things forward, try to create jobs as temporary as they are in certain projects, okay? But it's not very easy. And with a government that is on the weak side, with institutions that need a lot of reform and a lot of improvement, the army was used as the vehicle, actually, to try and push these things forward. Of course, initiating projects is one thing. Managing these projects and maintaining them for the future of the country is another story altogether. And so what is expected in the next phase and what is advised and expected and quite understood is that the army cannot continue to play this role. It will have to be the private sector that takes over after that. So then the role here, okay, is not a role of the government in a sustainable way or in a continuous and a permanent way, but rather a way of pushing, initiating things, sort of an incubator kind of thing, initiating projects that would be taken over and managed after that by the private sector because it's the only one that can do it, okay? So this is this part of the public sector. We have the second part of the public sector being the public institutions, okay, that are in charge of many things, like when you talk about the Ministry of Agriculture, when you talk about the Research Institute in Agriculture, when you talk about agriculture is always a very good example there because it's always seen as a private thing. Everybody owns land, agriculture is private, so what is there to talk about? No, it's not really completely private because you have the cooperatives, you have the Ministry of Agriculture, you have the research institute within agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. All of these need serious restructuring and serious improvement because at this point they are impeding the development of the private sector, okay? So part of handling the private sector, okay, the fly doesn't like what I'm saying, it must be the Ministry of Agriculture, okay, or industry for that matter, right? Okay. They need transformation, they need serious restructuring and improvement so that they become an enabler for the private sector and not an impediment. We know that there are a lot of things that can be improved, but there is no time for this within the allocated time that they had allowed me. Again, then you have the public sector that's involved in services, okay? In all countries in the world, you always have some involvement, okay, of the government in the area of services, okay? Because there is a bit of social justice, a bit of geographic justice that would not be necessarily achieved if you have the private sector that's completely in charge of this. For example, if you think of transportation, you would not have a train or a bus go to very, very far away places where there is only one individual that would come out on the bus. They would not do it normally, okay? But if the government is involved, then it would happen. And it has to happen because it's part of the country and this person is a citizen, okay? But the fact that the public institutions are involved in that does not mean it does not have to be efficient, okay? It has to be efficient, and it can have the private sector involved in the management with the rules of the government that maintain the geographic justice and the social justice part of it, so we would have efficiency and we would have fairness at the same time. But this also requires quite a bit of structural reform. Then we reach really the toughest part, okay, which is the legacy of the number of companies, a number of public sector companies that are in the manufacturing sector. And here we need to answer two questions, okay? What needs to be done if we are really doing it correctly? And what are the present efforts? And where do they fit in this correct picture? What needs to be done, first of all, we have to make sure that whatever solution that we reach has to be fair. You cannot punish workers who are working in the public sector because they are there, okay? And they are excess and they are not needed. They did not employ themselves, they did not appoint themselves. You did, as a government, as a country. So whatever solution you talk about has to be fair. Whatever solution you talk about has to increase the efficiency of that sector, okay? It has to be associated with the value chain, the clear value chain approach, and with the purpose of being more efficient, not with the purpose of selling, I have to sell it, okay? To give you an itch, it has to be sold. No, it has to look at the value chain, look at what can be done, okay? If it is useful at all, if it is not useful, then how to handle it in the right way. We have to look at innovative solutions for handling it, okay? Because it's quite sensitive area. And we have to be, most important of all, we have to be very, 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 from now until tomorrow, transparent about it. We cannot do it in hiding. We cannot do it in a blurred way. We cannot pretend that people do not see what's happening. So it has to be done in a very transparent way. This is how it should be done, okay? Now, what are we doing really about it, okay? And what can be proposed, okay? What we are doing really about it is sort of tackle the problem in a very, very careful way, but only scratching the surface, not really reaching a solution, okay? We are doing a bit of selling for some of the shares of these companies. The selling as it stands right now, 20% here, 15% there in the stock market, in my opinion, okay, is not going to do much. Okay? Because here, what you are selling is not a percentage of the shares that would make a transformation in the management. Okay? The management is associated with what's being, who has the shares, all right? So you're not really doing that, okay? And it's not very clear what's going to happen with the funds that are coming out of this sale. Are you going to take this money and re-inject it in the sector so that the areas that are good, okay, and can be better would be improved? Is this really what's going to happen? It's not very clear at this point. So in my opinion, this is not really the solution, okay? In my opinion, the solution should be to do an assessment of all those public sector companies, all those holding companies, not as a holding company, but rather as individual enterprises, individual enterprises, those affiliated companies, assess them one by one, see which ones have economic feasibility, in other words, which ones are really needed, which ones really have value added, which ones really have a market share, and the issue is more or less associated with their management, okay, which is a big issue, and with the number of employees. But the factory itself is needed, okay? If this is done at every sector, then you are going to end up selling some companies for sure because they are not needed, okay? Now, as you sell them, what do you do, okay? The funds have to be re-injected in the system so that the ones that are feasible can actually grow. You would have an improved technology, you would have better results, okay? Now, what about the workers? Most of the workers that are in the public sector companies, from the initial assessments, okay, are all on the older side. In other words, we're talking about from 55 on, ones that are very close to the retirement age, okay? Which means that the handling here could be early retirement and a lot of other things, okay? Where would the funds come from? The funds should come from areas like the social fund. If you know the social fund, when the social fund was first created, one of its big objectives, okay, was to actually have a program. Most of the funds were supposed to go actually for the restructuring of the public sector, which never took place. But there has to be a fund that deals with the workers in an extremely fair way, and there are lots of other solutions that are known, okay, like encouraging the workers to start small enterprises around this big enterprise to support in certain things, retrain the workers, okay, retrain them, reintroduce new skills so that they can go and help in other areas, okay, and so on and so forth. But the funds that are coming are re-injected, okay, in what remains in this value chain to make it actually much stronger. And we do have examples of success stories there, and this is where I'm going to end my talk. There is a company that you all know the name of. It's called Bisco Masr in the food industries. Bisco Masr was one of the total utter failures in the food industries, okay? Complete failure, all right? It was completely restructured by an investment fund, as a matter of fact, completely restructured without losing jobs, okay? Rebranding of the company using the original name, improving the techniques, doing a lot of things, okay? If it could be done here, it can be done for a lot others. So there are many, many ideas there. So it does not have to be a complete close down. It does not have to be a complete sale of assets. It does not have to be a complete kick out of workers. It does not have to be completely out, okay? It has to be looked at in a transparent way and deciding what needs to remain and can remain and would add value to the economy and what needs to disappear with funds going in the correct direction. This is just very briefly what I wanted to say, considering that I arrived late and all of this, and the time constraint. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abla. Very informative and detailed plan of how the government plans to deal with the public state-owned enterprise. I'm going to keep you for a couple of minutes from the break. The Business Forward is a branded product of the School of Business. It is really a knowledge platform that we're very happy to launch. And this effort is led by Shireen Mashad, who's the Associate Director for Communication and Marketing. Maybe Shireen, you can come for a couple of minutes and tell us more about Business Forward, please. Thank you. Thank you, Shireen.
Hi. So we started 1 year ago. There was a lot of preparation before that, and I have a great team. So Gehad and Toa are working really, really hard on this. We've been developing the brand. I think you are all aware of it, and we're very glad to have you guys here. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you to AUC for inviting me to address you on the first anniversary of Business Forwards. I wish I could be there in person, sitting on the panel, but it's a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk to you about the DNA of Egypt's economy and what needs and the way forward. we can't understate the magnitude of the transformation that has been happening to our economy and its DNA over the past couple of years. We've gone from an economy that 10 years ago was really driven by cheap subsidized energy, by an overvalued currency that made it much easier to import goods and products and distribute them in Egypt, but created very little incentive for Egyptian companies to be competitive and to be exporters. So we've gone from that distorted situation to one where we have the potential today as a country and as an economy to be a lot more competitive. After the devaluation of the Egyptian pound, it's become for a lot of businesses, it's become a lot more competitive to produce goods and services in Egypt, either as import substitutions or for the purpose of exporting them. With energy subsidies being phased out, the emphasis has shifted from energy-consuming industries like cement or fertilizers or steel to a host of other industries that now have the potential to grow in this country, capitalizing on energy efficiency and without these distortions existing in the economy. So there's a very important shift taking place. The real challenge to unlock that shift, though, and for this country to really start growing not at 4 or 5 or 6% per year, but at the 7, 8, 9% growth that it really needs year on year on a sustained basis, on a broad basis, i.e. not simply a small part of the economy or a small segment of the population benefiting, but really broad-based growth. The key for all of that to happen is to really maintain this momentum of economic reforms and to shift the focus more and more on promoting, incentivizing the private sector, making Egypt a much easier place to do business in, whether it's for young entrepreneurs starting businesses or for foreign investors looking to come in and build projects in this country, or large local groups like the one I represent, to do important large-scale projects that really move the country forward. And there's been a lot of progress done, in fairness, over the course of the past couple of years on that front as well, between the new investment law, new bankruptcy law. So there is an overhaul of the country's legislation that is taking place, and we've got an extremely competent and dynamic government pushing on that front. But there is so much more that can be done in terms of really signaling to the private sector, whether it's local or whether it's international, whether it's SMEs or whether it's large businesses, that Egypt is open for business, and really drive the message that it ought to be private enterprise that is the key driver of growth in this country. Two more thoughts I want to share with you. Critical to this phase of entrepreneurship and growth and private enterprise is this idea of innovation. We live in a world that is changing at a very, very rapid pace. So when we think of development and when we think of investments and when we think of growth, we can't be thinking in 20th century terms and 20th century industries. We have the opportunity, as other countries have done in Egypt, to really leapfrog some stages of development and to be at the forefront of what's happening in terms of technological advances in certain industries. So rather than trying to catch up, we ought to be doing again what other successful emerging markets have done, which is to see how we can take shortcuts, hacks, leapfrog some stages of development. Critical to that is going to be greater emphasis on innovation and entrepreneurship. And I'm really proud to see AUC be at the forefront of that, initially with the AUC Venture Lab, more recently through its innovation hub being established, and really throughout the way AUC approaches education in Egypt. So this is one critical aspect of continuing to transform Egypt's DNA and moving the country forward. The second one and it's more a word of caution, is to recognize that we don't operate in a vacuum. Egypt is part of a global economy, and we need to recognize that we're now moving into a phase after a number of years of very low interest rates, of a benign global environment, where the global picture is looking more challenging. Capital markets around the world, particularly emerging markets, have gone through a challenging period this past few months. Everybody, the consensus expectation is that interest rates in the US and globally are going to start to rise. So we need to recognize, as a country and as participants in this country's economy, that the global environment in the coming few years might become increasingly challenged. And I think that puts an added onus on Egypt to differentiate itself, to be an attractive investment destination, to do more, essentially, than it normally would because of this more challenging global environment. I'll leave it at that. I think we live at a time of tremendous opportunities, and I really hope and I believe that this country is at a point where, for the first time in a very, very long time, if we continue to do the right things, we can capitalize on that. Thank you so much.
So, thank you, Hisham. I really liked the few keywords that Hisham mentioned, such as leapfrogging, which is my personal view also. So, moving on with our agenda, since we're talking about reform, I'm very delighted also to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Reza Bakir. He's the senior resident representative of the International Monetary Fund in Egypt. So, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Very good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for the invitation to be here today and to talk about the role of the IMF in surveillance of Egypt's economic performance post the economic reform program. Before I begin, by way of background, I moved here about a year ago to open and head the office of the IMF in Egypt. And I want the community at AUC to especially know that we are your neighbor. Our office is quite close, and our doors are always open to any and all of you if you are interested to learn more about the role of the IMF in Egypt. So I welcome you to come and visit us sometime. I would like to begin by putting in context the current relationship of the IMF with Egypt. As some of you may know already, who are familiar with us, we have 3 levels of engagement. The first, and the one that gets the most media attention, is the financial assistance that we are providing in support of the authorities' reform program. We started this in 2016. And at $12 billion, this is our largest loan in the region. Of this amount, we have already disbursed $8 billion. There are $4 billion left. And the program, the loan, expires in November of next year. So we have about a year left. The purpose of this loan is to support the authorities' homegrown reform program. This reform program focused on 3 key areas, and I think it is good to remind ourselves what those were. First was to restore macroeconomic stability. Second, and it's important to note this, was to enhance the social safety nets to better protect the poor during the implementation of the economic reforms. And the third area was to advance structural reforms to support the private sector to create the needed jobs to cater to Egypt's young and dynamic population. Now, the program has proceeded successfully, and there has been a marked turnaround in economic sentiment. as noted earlier by Tariq, Hisham, and by others. At the same time, it is important to translate this improved market sentiment to more jobs and rising living standards, especially for the middle class. And the government's ongoing structural reform areas in areas such as promoting competition, improving industrial land allocation that Tariq also spoke about, the role of state-owned enterprises, and several others, these reforms that the government has on its agenda will go a long way to achieve this goal of translating the improved market sentiment to rising living standards. Now, there's been a lot said about the reform program and the loan, so I don't want to dwell on that here. Instead, I want to focus on the two other areas of our engagement with Egypt. Now, these are areas where we are heavily engaged, and these are areas where our engagement will continue after the end of the loan, after the end of the financial assistance. And these two areas are first the provision of technical assistance, and second is surveillance. I want to talk to you about each of these and explain to you a bit about what they mean. But before I do that, I want to note that, the IMF has 189 member countries. And for most of our members, about 80% of them, most of our relationship is characterized by surveillance and provision of technical assistance. It is only a small fraction of our members, 20%, where we are providing financial assistance. So a relationship which is centered around surveillance and technical assistance is the norm for the IMF. So let me first talk about technical assistance and what this means. So in very simple terms, this is the provision of advice in specific economic policy-related areas based upon international best practices. We organize this by having missions of experts visit from headquarters in Washington, D.C., or regional technical assistance centers. And often we bring, in addition to our staff, experts in the particular areas. These missions are not part of the loan program, and they are meant to complement the reform efforts that the government is already doing. So they can be in areas related to the loan, but they are also in areas that are not in the loan, but reforms that the government has already been undertaking. These missions are typically confidential, so they don't get as much media attention, but they take up as much of my time as any other mission. Now, what are examples of such engagement? I'll give you one very recent and very important area, which is called Medium-Term Revenue Strategy, or MTRS, something that the IMF has been advancing recently. And it is an approach and a strategy that starts off with the goal of defining what are the key social and other economic objectives that a government plans to reach, such as sustainable development objectives or others related to education, health, poverty, and so forth. It then does the costing exercise of what would be needed in terms of government spending to achieve these goals. Having done that exercise to cost them, it then defines what are the needed revenues from different sources and what needs to be done to the revenue system to attain those goals. Now, remember, this starts off with the objective of achieving social goals. All right? Even if a country does not have a high level of debt or a high level of deficit, this strategy is based upon what is needed to achieve social goals. And we have recently started a very constructive engagement with the government on developing such a medium-term revenue strategy for Egypt. What is our role in this is to support the government's effort by providing expertise from my colleagues who have developed this in other countries, such as, for example, Indonesia. We've had missions of these colleagues, and we also have regular video conferences between the authorities and our colleagues through the IMF office here, for our colleagues to provide and share with the government what has worked in other places. So this is one example of an ongoing technical assistance that is very key to achieving certain social objectives in Egypt. There are many other examples as well in which we have been providing technical assistance. Now these are all listed in our staff reports, which are published periodically, but usually a lot more interest, as I mentioned, is in the loan and not in the other parts of the document. So for instance, we are providing assistance in public financial management. We are providing assistance in developing better statistics and several other areas. If you want to see a list of these, you will find them in the most recent staff report that we have on Egypt and available on our website. So this very briefly is what I wanted to say about technical assistance. I will maybe add one more thought on this before I move on to talking about surveillance, and which is that the technical assistance does not come with any conditions. Okay, so it's provision of advice. And it is up to the country authorities to decide what to do with this advice. Some countries follow up quite proactively on this advice and follow up with us to get more. They demonstrate to us that they are implementing the recommendations, and we are happy to support more. In some other countries don't, because maybe they're busy with other issues or so forth. But at the end of the day, what happens with this technical assistance is really up to the country authorities, as it doesn't come with any conditions. So let me move on to the second area, which is surveillance. And surveillance, or in other words, economic monitoring, was one of the core mandates of the IMF when it was created. By becoming a member of the IMF, a country not only has a claim on IMF's resources, it also agrees to invite the IMF's surveillance on the policies of that country. And the key reason that this is important is because countries are interdependent in a global economy. And the policies of one country, the economic policies of one country, are important to the IMF not only from a consideration of what is needed, in our view, to strengthen economic prosperity, but also from a perspective that there are linkages across different countries. Now, how does the IMF exercise this surveillance or economic monitoring? We have two key vehicles, and the first is what we call bilateral surveillance. Our articles of agreement require a periodic visit by IMF staff. This visit is usually annually, to assess the economic situation in a country. This means taking stock of recent economic developments, looking at the economic outlook, and forming our views on the appropriate policies. You can think of it as sort of an annual health check. This is called the so-called Article 4 consultation, because it comes from the fourth article of our Articles of Agreement. These reports are usually published with the consent of the authorities, and they are all available on our website. So if you go on our country page for Egypt, you'll find the last few Article 4 reports that we have done, the most recent from earlier this year, the one before that, I believe, from 2015, another from 2010, and so forth. And what you'll find in these reports is a very candid narrative of the discussion that took place. There is a section where IMF staff describe what they said, what advice they gave to country authorities on various economic issues, whether it's the direction of fiscal policy or monetary policy, the policy mix, taking the two into account, or structural policies. It also contains the authorities' views. We have to very candidly relay what the authorities responded when we express to them certain views. And at the end of this report, it has what is called a staff appraisal, which is the assessment of the staff and the board, after the report is discussed at our board, of our views on what policies have more benefits than costs. So this is available to everybody. And it is one way in which we try to share our assessment with the broader interested community about the direction of economic policies. The Article 4 reports are not only focused on, say, the short-term economic issues, such as should interest rates be raised or lowered, should the deficit be reduced, and if so, at what pace, but it also has, and critically, an assessment of medium-term trends, a discussion of what is needed in the country from a medium-term perspective, 5-year perspective, especially on matters pertaining to growth. Is growth high enough? Is it being shared broadly enough? And if not, what are the policies that need to be undertaken? So to do this in-depth analysis, the Article 4 report is accompanied by what we call selected issues papers, and these are often available on our website in a link that is separate from the Article 4 report, so you have to look for it. Usually they come together. You can think of these as in-depth research papers that dig into specific topics. So if you look at the last Article 4 report, that is from 2018, you will find 3 selected issues papers. One is on the nature of growth and what needs to be done to make growth more inclusive and more sustainable. Another chapter or a research paper looked at mobilizing tax revenues, and it did some exercises that if in certain areas Egypt's policies with respect to tax administration and the tax laws were brought up or changed in certain areas, what could be the potential revenue yield that Egypt could realize for needed spending in social areas. A third chapter looked at the framework for monetary policy, how it has evolved and what could be further areas in which it could be modernized. If you go back to the previous Article 4 reports, you'll find other such in-depth studies on such topics. So this is, in a nutshell and very briefly, how we undertake bilateral surveillance. Another very important part of the way the IMF conducts surveillance is multilateral surveillance. And this is surveillance, not economic monitoring and analysis, not of a specific country per se, but of the global economy. Now, we have some flagship products that typically convey our views on the global economy. Some of you may have heard of the World Economic Outlook or the Global Financial Stability Report. These two are published twice a year, and they contain our analysis of the major issues facing the global economy. These are important to individual countries as well. And to give you an example of what might be a relevant piece of analysis that is very current, is if you look at our most recent World Economic Outlook that has been published, you will find in it an analysis of what could be the adverse impact on global GDP, as well as GDP of particular countries and regions, from an escalation of a trade war. As you know, trade and rising protectionism is a very live issue. And you will find in one particular chapter of the World Economic Outlook various scenarios based upon either announced policies or threats by various countries, with economic modeling by our staff on what, if those policies are carried out, what would be, in quantitative terms, the impact on GDP, either of the US or, say, of China or of particular regions. Now, obviously, this is relevant for individual countries because Egypt, like many other countries, is an open economy and it trades. And so this information, which is an example of multilateral surveillance, is also available to you and is a way in which we try to share our knowledge with the countries. Now, there is a lot more that I could talk to you about the ways in which the IMF conducts surveillance, but the best way would be to really go to our website, search for the last Article 4 staff report, and take a look at it, and you would be able to see the type of surveillance, what surveillance really means. So let me end by recapping what I said at the beginning, that our current engagement in Egypt consists of 3 levels. It's the financial assistance, it's the provision of technical assistance, and surveillance. The loan program would be ending, and we are looking forward to continuing our relationship in the other 2 areas, surveillance and technical assistance, to continue to support the economic reforms of the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Riza, for a very, now we know what to expect after from the IMF. I'm going to ask Dean Sharif Kamel to come on board.
I want to thank everybody. We had, as you all know, lined up Minister Rani Al-Mashat, but she's still actually in a meeting, and she sent me a message some 20 minutes ago to apologize. She won't be able to make it, unfortunately, but she promised, and I promise you all I'll connect with you, and we are going to organize an event where we're going to invite her in the next few weeks to actually cover the points that she was planning to cover. Having said that, she actually insisted to just give you a teaser of what she was planning to say. So her presentation's title was The Tourism Sector, What's Next? So she shared with me a couple of points that I'm just going to read out to you. Obviously, I'm not a tourism sector by no means. So the tourism sectors worldwide represent 10% of the global GDP. It provides $1.4 trillion of exports to the world economy. And it represents 30% of the global exports of services. 1 in every 10 jobs worldwide are in the tourism sector. Moving to Egypt, in the context of Egypt, it has been the fastest growing sector in 2017-18 and in 2018 and expected in Q1 2019. It has been the highest contributor to GDP in 2017-18 and again 2018-2019 Q1. She insists and wants to highlight that the narrative coming out of the Ministry of Tourism is changing, and last but not least, she sent to the Parliament the Egypt Tourism Reform Program. She calls it ERTP on November 26, just this past week. So she just wanted from me to share with you those sort of 40,000 feet highlight on her talk. And as I said, we're going to organize a talk where we're going to invite you all and herself in the coming few weeks. Thank you very much for coming. I think we had a very rich and diversified opinions today from different players, from different stakeholders. The good thing about it, it's all more future-oriented, looking forward. Obviously, we cannot move forward unless we highlight on the developments that are taking place, but also, as many of our guest speakers today also highlighted the challenges and suggested some of the sort of roadmaps and directions where we should be heading. So again, thank you very much, and we look forward to you subscribing to Business Forward and also promoting Business Forward, and to you joining us in future events at AUC. Thank you so much.